The moment the cameras went live, you could feel something different humming under the studio lights. This wasn't going to be a polite segment, and everyone knew it, even if they pretended not to. Jasmine Crockett sat straight-backed in her chair, one hand resting calmly over a slim black folder. Across from her, Scott Bessent reclined in that casual, practiced way that billionaires always did, like he had already decided nothing could touch him. But he was wrong. Rachel Maddow's voice cut through the hush, warm but edged with curiosity. Tonight, we're joined by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and investor Scott Bessent, here to discuss economic equity. Jasmine's eyes didn't leave Scott's face. She wasn't here for economic platitudes. She was here for the truth. Before Rachel could finish the introduction, Jasmine leaned forward just enough for her microphone to pick up every syllable. "I'm not here to talk about equity in the abstract," she said, her voice low and steady. "I'm here to ask Mr. Bessent how many working families were evicted because of the fund he started in 2019. Rachel's head snapped around. Scott's brows twitched, one tiny betrayal of discomfort. "And how much of that money is sitting in offshore accounts while you come on national television to pretend you care about the communities you helped dismantle?" The control booth exploded in whispers. A producer mouthed, "Cut to break," but no one moved. Scott's smile flickered. "That's quite an accusation," he said, his tone the careful calm of a man who thinks he can buy time with condescension. "I think you should clarify your—" "I'll clarify," Jasmine interrupted, flipping open her folder. Pages of documented transfers, wire receipts, and internal memos gleamed under the studio lights. "This isn't theory. These are your numbers. Your signatures. Your deals." Rachel blinked. The audience watching at home would never see her shock, but everyone in the studio did. Scott's jaw tightened, the practiced ease draining from his face. "You're not used to someone bringing receipts, are you?" Jasmine asked quietly. And in that instant, America leaned in, breath caught. This wasn't going to be a debate. It was going to be a reckoning. Scott shifted in his seat, trying to find that old, effortless smirk. But something had slipped. His eyes flicked to the folder like it was an unexploded device. Rachel cleared her throat, her voice pitched to diffuse the tension. "Congresswoman Crockett, for the record, these are serious claims. Are you suggesting Mr. Bessent personally profited from mass evictions?" Jasmine didn't look at Rachel. She kept her gaze locked on Scott, like she was holding him there by sheer force of will. "I'm not suggesting," she said calmly. "I'm stating." Scott leaned forward, his palms flat on the desk. "You have no idea what it takes to build something that creates jobs and opportunity, and destroys families," Jasmine countered without blinking. "Let's not forget that part." The studio was so quiet, you could hear the cameras adjusting focus. Rachel tried again. "Mr. Bessent, would you like to respond?" Scott inhaled through his nose, measured, as if he'd practiced this 100 times in front of a mirror. "Sure, I'll respond. Congresswoman, if you think running a fund makes you the villain, you're ignoring the fact that without capital, nothing gets built, no schools, no hospitals, no progress." Jasmine tilted her head, studying him like she was watching a specimen. "Funny," she murmured, "how you call it progress when it's your profits, and collateral damage when it's our communities." A flicker of something dark passed through Scott's expression. Jasmine lifted a single page from her folder and held it up so the cameras could see. "This is a letter your firm sent to the city council in Dallas, threatening to pull funding for public housing projects if they didn't approve your development incentives." Scott opened his mouth, but she didn't stop. "This is your signature," she continued, her voice clear and cold. "You leveraged people's desperation for your bottom line. And now you want to sit here and lecture the rest of us about responsibility?" Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her papers. Scott's jaw flexed. "You're twisting facts." "No," Jasmine said, her voice dropping just enough to feel like a warning. "I'm just telling them out loud." For a moment, the tension in the studio was so thick it felt alive. And every viewer across the country knew, Jasmine Crockett wasn't here to play along. She was here to burn the whole illusion to the ground. The producer's voice crackled in Rachel's earpiece. "We can end the segment, just nod." But she didn't. Something in her, maybe curiosity or maybe the rare taste of unfiltered truth, made her hesitate. Scott's lips pressed into a thin line, the mask of polite detachment slipping inch by inch. "You think you're some champion of the poor," he said, his voice pitched low so it wouldn't shake. "But you're just another politician trying to make headlines." Jasmine set the page down with deliberate care. "If I wanted headlines," she replied, "I'd be screaming. I'm not." She folded her hands, as if the folder between them was just paperwork, not a live grenade. "I'm sitting here calmly telling the American people exactly how you turned housing into a casino. How you bought influence to bend policy. And how you turned working families into statistics on a quarterly report." Scott shook his head, a short laugh escaping that sounded too brittle to be real. "You think you understand markets, Congresswoman? You think you understand what it takes to build capital?" Jasmine didn't move. Her voice stayed soft, almost conversational. "I understand that you made $40 million in 1 year while thousands of kids in my district went to bed without a safe place to sleep." Scott's jaw worked, but no words came out. Rachel tried to reclaim her role as moderator. "Congresswoman Crockett, let's be fair, Mr. Bessent has contributed to multiple philanthropic efforts." Jasmine looked at her then, and even Rachel flinched under that gaze. "Don't you dare sanitize this," she said, her tone calm but edged in steel. "This isn't about charity. This is about systemic extraction. The money he donates is a fraction of what he took." Scott's nostrils flared, the cool facade dissolving. "If you hate capitalism so much, why are you in Congress?" Jasmine turned back to him, her expression almost pitying. "Because someone has to be there to remind you that human lives aren't collateral." The studio went silent. Every person watching at home felt the line land like a verdict. And Scott Bessent, for the first time all night, didn't have a comeback. Rachel shifted in her chair, her eyes darting to the control booth. No one moved to save them from the moment. It was too late, America was already watching, transfixed. Jasmine didn't fill the silence. She let it breathe, let it become something heavier than accusation, something closer to confession, if only Scott had the nerve to make it. He didn't. He cleared his throat, reached for his water, and took a measured sip. When he spoke again, the polish in his voice was gone, replaced by something defensive and raw. "You're oversimplifying things you don't understand. You think this is all one big conspiracy to hurt people, but the real world isn't that black and white." Jasmine inclined her head. "You're right. It's not black and white. It's green." Scott's eyes narrowed. "Because when you have enough money," she continued, her tone deceptively mild, "you can call it investment instead of exploitation. You can call it restructuring instead of displacement. You can pay for PR consultants to scrub the truth from every headline, and most people will believe you." She lifted another sheet from the folder, tapping it once on the desk. "But here's the thing. Some of us grew up in those neighborhoods you bulldozed. Some of us still have family there. We don't forget." Scott opened his mouth, closed it again. His hand tightened around the glass. Rachel swallowed, her voice unsteady as she tried to bring the conversation back to safer ground. "Congresswoman, what do you say to viewers who think this is just political theater?" Jasmine turned her gaze to the camera for the first time. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. "I'd say look at your rent. Look at your paycheck. Look at the number of billionaires getting richer while you get told to work harder." She leaned in, her tone soft but unflinching. "This isn't theater. It's the reality you're living in. And they're counting on you being too tired, too distracted, or too ashamed to notice." In that second, the distance between the studio and every living room in America disappeared. And for the first time in a long time, people felt like someone was finally telling the truth, no matter who it offended. Scott's throat bobbed once as he swallowed. You could almost see the calculation in his eyes, whether to fight, deflect, or simply wait it out. But Jasmine didn't give him the chance. She flipped to the last page in her folder and slid it across the desk, her fingertip pressing the corner so it didn't slide away. The paper looked harmless, a spreadsheet, a few signatures, a letterhead. But the way she placed it made everyone watching understand this was the real payload. "Do you recognize this document?" she asked, voice cool as glass. Scott didn't answer. "It's a funding agreement," she continued, "between your hedge fund and the North Texas Redevelopment Authority. The same agreement that stipulated if the city council didn't approve your tax incentives, you'd liquidate low-income properties first. Before anything else." Rachel sucked in a breath. Scott finally found his voice, brittle and too quick. "That's standard operating procedure." "No," Jasmine cut in, her tone the quietest it had been all night, and somehow the most dangerous. "It's extortion. You held entire neighborhoods hostage for profit." Scott's hand hovered near the document like he wanted to snatch it back. Jasmine didn't move. She kept talking, her voice steady enough to rattle him more than yelling ever could. "You want to call it capitalism? Fine. But call it what it is. You got rich betting that no one would ever sit across from you on live television and read your own contracts back to you." She paused, letting the hush expand until the set felt like it was vibrating. "But here I am." Rachel blinked rapidly, her hand drifting to her throat. She tried to summon the professional detachment that had carried her through hundreds of interviews, but nothing came. Scott shifted in his chair. For the first time, he didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a man who knew he'd lost the room. Jasmine let the folder fall closed, her hand resting lightly on top. "You can spin this any way you want," she said softly. "But the truth doesn't need your permission to exist." And in living rooms across the country, people who had never heard Jasmine Crockett's name before were already reaching for their phones to find out more. Rachel glanced at the control booth, searching for a lifeline, some sign they should cut to commercial, wrap it up, pretend this had been just another harmless policy debate. But the producers didn't move. They knew better. This was no longer about ratings or scheduling. It was something they couldn't manufacture in 1,000 carefully scripted segments. A raw, unscripted confrontation that felt like history in real time. Scott exhaled through his nose, trying to rebuild the mask he'd worn so effortlessly when the cameras first started rolling. But the cracks were there now, obvious and spreading. "Congresswoman," he said, voice clipped, "you're implying that I am personally responsible for structural issues that have existed for generations." Jasmine didn't look away. She didn't even blink. "I'm not implying," she replied, her voice calm as a slow-moving storm. "I'm stating, again. You exploited those structural issues. You turned them into your business model." Scott's jaw flexed. "That's an oversimplification." Jasmine shook her head, cutting him off. "No. That's clarity. You don't get to hide behind complexity just because the truth is ugly." Her hand moved to the folder, tapping it once. "These are the receipts. The wire transfers. The property filings. The eviction notices. Your team signed every one." Rachel drew in a shaky breath. She realized then that she hadn't spoken for nearly a minute, and no one cared. No one was here for her tonight. Jasmine turned her gaze to the camera, her eyes steady and dark. "To anyone watching this at home," she said, voice dropping to something almost intimate, "you have been told that your poverty is your own fault. That if you worked harder, if you were smarter, you'd be safe. That's the biggest lie of all." Scott's face went pale. "You are not failing," Jasmine continued. "You are surviving an economy built to keep you tired, divided, and too ashamed to fight back." For a moment, the entire studio felt like it was holding its breath. And in living rooms and break rooms and bedrooms across America, people felt something they hadn't felt in a long time, recognition. Because the truth wasn't polite. But it was undeniable. Scott looked down at the table, his hands splayed wide as if he could steady himself by sheer force of will. But no carefully crafted talking point would save him now, and he knew it. Rachel swallowed, her voice hushed as she tried to reclaim the space. "Mr. Bessent, do you want to respond before we close this segment?" He lifted his gaze, but the arrogance was gone, replaced by something brittle and exhausted. "This isn't fair," he said, his voice cracking just enough that everyone heard it. "I've contributed millions to community programs." Jasmine tilted her head, her expression almost sympathetic. "Almost. And that absolves you?" she asked, voice soft but unsparing. "You made billions. You gave back pennies on the dollar and called it philanthropy." Scott blinked. No words came. Jasmine leaned forward, her elbows resting lightly on the folder. "Do you think the families evicted from those properties care how many charity galas you funded?" Silence. Rachel didn't try to rescue him. Jasmine's voice dropped to something nearly gentle. "I'm not here because I hate you. I'm here because someone has to say this out loud. Because for every Scott Bessent who gets a seat at this table, there are thousands of people who will never be invited, people who deserve to be heard just as loudly." Scott's shoulders sagged, the defeat written in every line of his face. "You can call this an attack if it helps you sleep," Jasmine continued, her voice steady. "But this isn't personal. It's structural. And you are the face of that structure." The words settled into the studio like a heavy fog. Rachel drew in a long, shaky breath. "Congresswoman Crockett, I think you've made your point." Jasmine's eyes didn't leave Scott. "I didn't come here to make a point," she said quietly. "I came here to end the lie." And in that moment, even Scott Bessent seemed to understand there would be no going back. For the first time all night, Scott looked like he wanted to be anywhere but there. His hand drifted to the glass of water again, but he didn't drink. He just held it, knuckles white. Rachel shifted her notes, her voice little more than a whisper. "Congresswoman, some might say this is a personal vendetta." Jasmine turned to her, expression calm, but her eyes were fierce. "You know what's personal?" she asked softly. "Watching your neighbors lose everything they have because someone in a suit decided their homes were just another asset to flip." Scott flinched. "Watching your city council get bought out one vote at a time," Jasmine continued, her voice gaining strength, "until there's no one left to fight for you." She leaned closer to the mic. "That's personal." A quiet shiver ran through the control room. Even the crew, seasoned professionals who'd seen 1,000 interviews, couldn't look away. Scott cleared his throat, the sound brittle. "You think you can just demonize private investment and nothing will collapse? You think public programs can sustain themselves without the capital I bring?" Jasmine's eyes narrowed, but her voice stayed almost unbearably steady. "No. I think communities survive in spite of you, not because of you." He looked away, unable to hold her gaze any longer. She pressed on, her tone soft but relentless. "You and men like you have built your empires on the assumption that no one will ever look past the headlines. That no one will ever dig into the filings, the clauses, the threats buried in legalese." Her hand settled on the folder again, and the simple motion made Scott look back up. "I'm not afraid of your lawyers," she said. "Or your donors. Or your lobbyists." A pause so heavy it felt like the air itself thickened. "I am afraid," Jasmine continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "that we will keep pretending this is normal. That we will keep telling ourselves there's nothing we can do." Rachel let out a shaky breath she didn't know she'd been holding. And all across America, people realized they were holding theirs too. Scott's eyes darted around the studio, as if searching for an exit that didn't exist. But there was no script to rescue him, no comforting applause line, no safe haven of polite disagreement. Jasmine waited. Not to be dramatic, but because she understood the power of silence. The power of letting the truth echo long enough that even the most comfortable people felt it in their bones. Finally, Scott found his voice. You have no idea what it takes to build anything real, he said, but the sentence wavered at the end, thin and defensive. All you know how to do is tear things down. Jasmine tilted her head, her face unreadable. You're right, she said quietly. I don't know what it takes to build a fortune off evictions and tax loopholes. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. But I do know what it takes to survive them. That single line detonated something in the room, something raw and undeniable. Rachel's pen slipped from her fingers and clattered on the desk. Neither of them looked at her. Jasmine's voice softened, but the steel never left. You think this is about me trying to humiliate you? It isn't. It's about every person who's been told they're worthless because they don't own enough to matter. Scott didn't respond. He couldn't. You built your power on other people's exhaustion, she said. On the belief that no one would ever challenge you in public, that no one would dare call this theft to your face. Her eyes narrowed. So here I am. Daring. The camera zoomed in just enough to capture the fine tremor in Scott's jaw. And in living rooms from Oakland to Omaha, people who'd never heard of Jasmine Crockett whispered the same thing. She's not afraid of him. Rachel looked down, her voice low. Congresswoman, any final words before we close? Jasmine didn't look away from Scott. Yes, she said. And then she paused, letting the hush build into something electric. Jasmine's voice was so quiet when she spoke that the microphones almost missed it. But the control booth cranked the volume, and every syllable landed clear and sharp across the country. People like you, she said softly, count on the rest of us being too tired, too afraid, or too divided to notice what you've done. Scott swallowed, but said nothing. You count on us believing the lie that poverty is a moral failing. That if we were just smarter, or worked harder, or asked less, we wouldn't be here, she continued. Her gaze never wavered. You built an empire on that lie. And you built your image on the idea that no one would ever challenge it where everyone could see. She leaned forward, her hand resting lightly on the folder one last time. I'm not here to negotiate with you. I'm here to make sure the people watching know that none of this is inevitable, she said. It's designed. And if it's designed, it can be dismantled. Rachel sat back in her chair, hands limp in her lap. Even she knew there was nothing left to say. Jasmine exhaled, her voice steady but almost tender. To every family sitting at a kitchen table tonight wondering how you'll keep the lights on, to every parent working 2 jobs so your kids can stay in the same zip code, this is not your shame. It's theirs. Scott's face was a study in stunned disbelief. And Jasmine finally looked at Rachel, her tone clear as a bell. That's all I have. The cameras lingered a second longer, capturing the quiet, devastating power of the moment. Then the screen went black. But across the country, the conversation had only just begun. When I walked onto this set tonight, I knew exactly what I was stepping into. I knew the headlines that would come, the labels they'd try to pin on me, angry, radical, divisive. But here's what I want every person watching to remember. This was never about me. It was never about one fund, or one billionaire, or one televised argument. It's about who we choose to believe deserves dignity. It's about how easily we excuse exploitation when it's dressed up in strategy and called growth. And it's about whether we have the courage to look at this system, and the people who profit from it, and finally say, enough. You don't have to be rich to deserve respect. You don't have to be powerful to matter. And you are not invisible. I'm not here because I enjoy conflict. I'm here because silence never saved anyone. So if tonight felt uncomfortable, good. That means you were listening. Don't let this end when the cameras stop rolling. Ask questions. Speak up. Stand beside the people whose stories are always edited out of the narrative. Because no matter how carefully they spin it, the truth is still the truth. And we are not going anywhere.